Does spirituality require a religion? This question is incredibly important for a few reasons. Number one is I hear more and more from a lot of people who are feeling, especially nowadays, this spiritual becoming. They're asking the question, and I've had this even from people who are Jewish that are looking to connect, if I feel spiritual and I have this godly thing going on inside of me, do I need a religion to seemingly constrict it? Is religion going to become a problem, or can the religion and the spirituality somehow work together? That's the current question. And the reason why this is important is because there's a belief that spirituality is inherently more free. If I'm a spiritual person, not prejudiced or limited by religious rituals and ceremonies, I'm more free, I'm more tolerant, I'm less inflexible. So the question I really have is, and this is the question we're going to explore for the next 20 minutes, is it true that a spiritual person can't be a religious one? And vice versa. If you're a religious person, spirituality is somewhat inaccessible to you because of the rules and the rituals and the laws. So I want to start by just mentioning a couple things I saw over my own 20-year journey that I think are very relevant. Number one, 22 or so years ago, I took a cultural anthropology class. Now, this is my first time in anthropology, so we had a somewhat thick book, and our PhD instructor had lived with tribes across the world to explore the spiritual practices of different people. Here's what the conclusion was. Every continent on the planet, going back to as far back as we can document, has had religious or spiritual societies. It seems to be hardwired into the human experience. Human beings are looking for God. They're looking for the divine. And this is something that was his thesis, is that that is a fact. You can't take this out of the human being. We could talk about less mature versions, more mature versions, but ultimately, spirituality is here to stay. The question is, what about religion? So I want to change the typical thinking of religion as being something involving simple ceremony and ritual to a different understanding based upon what Kabbalah teaches. And this applies to anyone. If we say religion is ceremony, let's take it one step further. It's not just ceremony. Religion, according to Kabbalah, has two principal functions. One, reveal the godly spark within. And second, transformation of the physical world. That's the objective. So it's not the result of imprisonment or containing or trying to limit someone. On the contrary, it helps free this God particle within, and furthermore, it articulates it, brings it to the outside to transform and evolve the world. So, if religion is coming for that purpose, to help focus us and take the spiritual side of us and give it a voice, we have to ask the question, then what are the rituals for? What do the rituals actually do? Different religions have different rituals and different ceremonies and different types of prayers and incantations. But what is the driving force behind it all? What is it trying to do from the understanding of Kabbalah? So I want to start with an idea that I think most of us can appreciate because we've all had some experience with this, and that is Michelangelo. Anyone here not see a Michelangelo sculpture before? So to think about when he lived and what he was able to achieve in that life of his is remarkable. Having no computers, no modern science, to look into a piece of stone and to bring out of the stone through craftsmanship something so lifelike that I would challenge even modern artists to duplicate his work is riveting for us. It's sensational. How was he able to do that? So Michelangelo once said, when asked the question, how do you sculpt? How do you make a Moses or a David? He said very famously, all I do is I free the image from the stone. I can see the image inside, but I have to take the chisel to cut away the outside and bring the image out. I'm not starting by hammering and hoping that maybe along the way something beautiful comes out. That's like me when I'm writing. But what he did was he saw the form inside and he could bring the form to life through cutting away the exterior. So now, if Michelangelo had this voice inside of him, a vision inside of him that said, this is what's there, but he never picked up a chisel to hammer into the stone, could he have produced the work he produced? And the answer is no. The intent alone, the vision itself alone, might be something that's private to him. But to imbue the vision to the outside requires he picks up the chisel, he hammers into the stone, and he produces the work through his efforts. So we're going to think about rituals being very similar. The world is analogous to a block of unformed, unsculpted stone. The religious process, what it's supposed to do, if it's done properly, is affect the world in such a way that the form, the true godly form, comes out of it. So therefore, think of your rituals that you do in a religious sense as being nothing more than taking an already existing vision, manifesting it to the outside, and cutting away the coarse exterior to reveal the true form inside. That's what rituals ultimately are meant to achieve. So now, to help hammer that in a little bit more, I'm going to invite for one moment my dear friend Marcus up. And I want to take us on a bit of a journey. This is not going to be a full martial arts demonstration, obviously, although it's certainly tempting. But and we could spend quite some time doing this. But I want to make a point about martial arts. Many years ago, Dr. Yang Ming, who, if you don't know the martial arts world, is one of the more famous kung fu personalities, probably alive, because he made it accessible to the American public and brought real traditional art from the Orient all the way to America. Somebody once asked him, in kung fu traditional training, there's weapons. There's stick and there's sword and all kinds of things that were maybe relevant 500 to 1,000 years ago. Why do we do it now? And his answer was incredible. He said, it's not about learning the weapon because the weapon is what your ultimate goal is. The weapon is an extension of the person. If the focus is right and the movement is right, all the weapon is an extension of their ability. So what's it really trying to do? To bring out of the person something that is locked inside. That's all the practice is. So, as an example, in basic training with martial artists, you'll seldomly see any beginner holding a weapon, because I'm about to show you exactly why that would be. If you tell a beginner, I want you to block a stick coming at you with a thrust, he'll probably do something like this, and he'll try to block it to save his life. What he won't see is when the stick comes in, he won't use his body to move the weapon. The reason why is because he feels the weapon is separate from him. So what will he ultimately end up doing? He'll practice, and if he goes slow, he'll do it once, he'll come in again, he'll do it twice, he'll do it again a third time, he might add a few more moves to it, but ultimately it's very, very slow, methodical work that could take years of development. Thank you. Okay, why is that? Because the ultimate goal is that as time goes on, the weapon becomes part of who he is. And all the weapon's doing is to bring out of him a vision he already has. Defending himself, moving his body properly. So in martial arts, we have religious rituals. They're not spiritual per se, but the point of them is to bring the inside to the outside through repetitive technique and movement in order to achieve this goal. If you don't practice that way, she can never become a true martial artist, because ultimately it's locked inside and nothing brings it out. In a similar way, some 20 years ago, when I was contemplating going into the Chinese medical school, I remembered that my first instructor, day one, was a guy named Amir Zagros, Dr. Amir Zagros. What made him fascinating was he'd walk into the room with no notes and spend 3 hours just lecturing on everything. He just knew everything by heart. What made it more impossible was he could take a little needle, a little acupuncture needle, and he would do this and show us just how far he's come in his training. He would ask for a volunteer. The volunteer would readily submit him or herself for extra credit, obviously. And he would take the needle, and from about a foot away, he would throw it into the body, hitting exactly the point that he intended to hit. Now, we all tried this technique, obviously, and it's bouncing everywhere and falling off things. But he would literally hold the needle, and he would just do this, and it would fly to the point. And now this is 15, 20 years ago, so I'd say that I still can't do it now. I'm not Amir Zagros in my acupuncture technique. I can't throw it from a football field away and achieve the bullseye. But I asked him, how does one even learn to do that? How can you possibly, and by the way, there was no pain. He hit exactly the spot, and no one ever said, ouch, that hurts me, leave me alone, runs out of the class and faints. Never happened. They would simply just say, wow, I feel this warm, tingly feeling. Why? Because to train that technique, he would take the needle, and he would take the skin of an orange or a grapefruit, and he would throw it into the skin 1,000 times a day, until eventually the needle itself would make contact with the skin, penetrate through, and hit exactly the spot he intended to affect. So the acupuncturist is not, so to speak, achieving something magical. They're taking a vision of health. Through the ritual of the needle, they're moving into the body to affect what's going on with this person's condition. If he didn't have the needle, if Michelangelo didn't have the chisel, if the martial artist didn't have the stick, the staff, or the sword, or any kind of weapon, and this practice was not going on, then the internal vision could never be realized. That's the point. So when the question's asked what religion ultimately does, it is the tool of the trade to bring the soul out and reveal it. That's what religion is supposed to be. If religion is not that, if it's for control, if it's for organization purposes, some kind of sociology experiment, I understand those things, and that's fine. But if you ask what a rectified religious practice is, it's to bring an already existing vision to the outside world. And how do we do it? Ritualistic practice. So, the obvious question is, if the martial artist requires the stick, and the acupuncturist the needle, other kinds of techniques as well, and Michelangelo or the artist, the chisel, the brush, whatever the instrument happens to be, if they need those things, what are the instruments that a spiritual cultivating person requires? How does one achieve the goal? And the answer is very simple. When we talk about commandments, you ask most people on the street, what is the commandments of the Bible? They'll say, oh, the 10 Commandments. It's almost common knowledge. And you ask the question, what are these 10 Commandments about? What do we do with them? Well, they are commanded of you in order to follow what God or the king requires. It's true, obviously, but there's a deeper meaning to the idea of a commandment. In Hebrew, if I say to you commandment, the word actually means, in addition to a command, is a connection. You're making a connection. So if I train my body to connect over and over and over again, I am achieving this concept of taking something on the inside and to bring it to the outside. So, in the biblical narrative, if one were to count going from the first page all the way to the end, you would encounter exactly 613 prescriptions, these commandments. So the obvious question people would have if they're thinking dynamically is, why 613? We know that there's 10, the famous 10. The 10 are general principles, but deeper in its pages are 613 specific rituals or tools to bring the vision to the outside. What are these rituals about? Why that number? So 2,000 years ago, the Talmud gave us an interesting way to relate it to us. It says like this, these 613 break into two separate categories. There are 248 of the 613 that are specifically for the purpose of action-oriented work. You will do them. You will give charity, etc., and so on. The do's of the Bible. There are 365 don't do's. Avoid, don't murder, don't steal, etc. So if we have 248 do's and 365 don't do's, to what do these numbers correspond? You'd think maybe an even divide would be a better model. Why do we have this number? It seems a little bit imbalanced. So the answer is as follows. 248 do's correspond to 248 limbs of the human body, which the commentators explain to mean the skeleton, bones. 365 don't do's are 365 sinews. That's their word, is sinews, found within the human body. Now, just parenthetically, Encyclopedia Hebraica, one of the most famous encyclopedic works in Israel, had a team of surgeons that were curious about this number 248. So they went to work. Why is that number 248? 206, 208, there's different ideas. Here's what they found. Upon an autopsy of an infant who passed away, they discovered that the amount of bones in this autopsy, in this very, very young child, numbered 248. As we age and the bones ossify, even the skull, as an example, has 22 bones. If I ask you to palpate and tell me how many bones your head has, you'll probably feel the ramus, the jaw. You won't feel 22 separate bones, because many of them, upon ossification, close, and we can't feel them, we can't locate them. But according to this team of surgeons, in a young child prior to ossification, 248 bones in the body, which means that each one of the biblical prescriptions saying to you, do something, relates to a corresponding bone. Now, as far as the 365 sinews go, that was a little bit more mysterious till the event of the Chinese medical program. Apparently, in classical Chinese medicine, what's called the bronze man, the model that shows the ancient distribution of points, has exactly 365. And they're located from head to toe on what's called channels. And what do these channels do? Move qi and move blood, move the energy and blood of the body. So not surprisingly, about 400 years ago, Kabbalah came and said that the sinews mentioned before are not sinews as we think of sinews to be. Rather, they're conduits of blood and energy. When I found that, I was shocked. It's almost identical literature. So, what do the 613 prescriptions achieve? Again, corresponding to your skeleton and to your physiology. As you practice them, they become similar to the tool in the hand of Michelangelo, or the stick and weapon in the hand of a martial artist, or any tool that brings something out from the inside. When you practice something over and over again, it brings and awakens your talent and gives it a voice. So these biblical prescriptions are for one reason only: to access, open, and reveal the godliness within. And this is quite contrary to the belief that religion is giving someone God. This is an emphatic no. From a Kabbalistic standpoint, you have that anyways, whether or not you practice or you don't. It's like someone who's the child of a great athlete. They will have the genetics to be a great athlete whether they practice or don't. The only difference is, if they practice correctly, this genetic bequeathing comes to life. They can become that athlete. If they don't practice, it remains only a potential. The function of religion, therefore, is none other than, if it's practiced correctly by somebody with the intention to bring this godliness out, its only purpose is to take that which you already possess and give it an expression. And having said that, we can now summarize what the role is, from a Kabbalistic standpoint, of the Jewish people to the non-Jew. Many religions tend to spend time monopolizing and trying to recruit people to their cause or to their fold. The Kabbalistic response is, every single individual has a path meant for them. Some paths are this way, some paths are that way, but ultimately, if it's a good religious practice, it brings something out. The Jewish objective, this is how the Kabbalistic words work, is to draw lights down. The non-Jew's practice is to create a reality in the world, a civil, well put together reality that's capable of holding onto these lights. So if you think about it in terms of the light bulb and the electricity, if the Jewish people are meant to practice a certain kind of ritual, 613 rituals, that objective is to create an electrical current. But no light bulb, no filament, no tungsten, there's no light. So the synergy between the Jewish and non-Jewish world is essential. That's why typically the Jewish people don't spend an inordinate amount of time seeking recruits, even though our numbers are very small. The reason why is very simple. Depending upon the proclivity and nature of the person, what they feel their calling is, this is up to the individual. It's not meant for me to try to bring someone else in. If they inquire, then of course someone's always able to join. But the ultimate role is the follows. When a person feels a connection to a certain spiritual path, as long as that path is a godly centered path that brings this potential out, then it's fine. That's what they're meant to walk, without any help from me. If the path is not a godly centered path and leads more to the destructive tendencies that some religious paths create, then it's not about a godly connection at all. It's about the ego. It's about power. So this is why the spiritual traditions are so essential, because there's so many of them. And we are not here to shout down some and augment others. The real question is different. Is the practice that you're following a practice leading to this idea that the godliness already in you is being broadcast? If the answer is yes, then it's a good tradition. If the answer is no, then there's something injurious about what you're connected to. So in short, when choosing your rituals, when choosing your path, make sure that what you choose is ultimately an expression of who you are. For the Jew, it's meant to be something that avails itself of the Torah world. Whatever amount you do depends upon you. And for the non-Jew, it's about finding a connection that really connects and makes sense. So when you walk that path, this godliness inside is not only produced, but affects the world around you. And why? Because like Michelangelo, if we use the tools properly, we can cut away the stone and bring out the true godly form of the world that's waiting for us to take our abilities and our uniqueness, our talent, and contribute it to the process.